I had just pushed life into the world when the man I married took one look at my newborn son and stepped back like he'd seen a ghost. Let me paint you the picture, because you need to understand how fast everything can fall apart. 1 second you're holding this tiny, perfect creature against your chest, still covered in vernix, still making those little mewling sounds that break your heart open, and the next, you're watching your husband's face transform into something you don't recognize. Marcus DeLauro, investment banker. Sharply pressed Tom Ford suit even at 3 a.m. in a delivery room. The man who'd held my hand through 7 hours of labor suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. "Marcus?" My voice came out hoarse, destroyed from screaming. "Do you want to hold him?" He didn't move, just stood there at the foot of the bed, staring at our son like he was evidence in a crime scene. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. That's when I heard the click of heels on linoleum. Vivienne DeLauro swept into the room like she owned it, and knowing my mother-in-law, she probably thought she did. Pearl necklace catching the harsh hospital lights, Chanel suit at dawn. Hair so perfectly set it could survive a hurricane. She positioned herself right behind Marcus, one manicured hand on his shoulder, and looked at my baby with the kind of smile you give spoiled milk. "Well," she said, voice dripping with that Upper East Side venom I'd learned to recognize over 3 years of marriage, "he certainly has distinctive features." My arms tightened around my son instinctively. "What are you talking about?" Marcus finally spoke. His voice was flat, dead. "Anna, we need to talk about this." "Talk about what? Our baby?" I looked between them, my exhausted brain trying to make sense of what was happening. "Marcus, what is going on?" He pulled away from his mother, came closer to the bed, and I actually thought for one stupid second that he was going to kiss me, tell me I was amazing, that we'd created this miracle together. Instead, he leaned in close and whispered, "That child is not mine." The room tilted. I heard the monitors beeping. Heard the nurse shifting uncomfortably near the door. Heard my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Excuse me?" "You heard him." Vivienne's voice cut through the fog. She moved to Marcus's side, presenting a united front. "My son will not be signing any birth certificate until we get answers." I stared at them, at my husband of 3 years, at the woman who'd never thought I was good enough for her precious son, the girl from Queens who'd somehow trapped her Yale-educated boy. "Marcus," I could barely form words, I would never. "Then you won't mind a DNA test." Vivienne pulled out her phone like she'd been waiting for this moment. "I've already called our family attorney. We'll have the results in 48 hours. "A DNA test?" I looked down at my son, at his perfect little face, his tiny fists curled against my hospital gown. "You think I cheated on you?" Marcus wouldn't look at me, just stared at some point over my shoulder. "I think we need to be sure." "Be sure?" My voice broke. "I just gave birth to your son, and you're standing there accusing me of—" "The baby has dark hair," Vivienne interrupted. "Matter of fact, neither you nor Marcus have dark hair. And those eyes—" "He's 2 hours old." I was shouting now, and I didn't care. "Baby's features change. Marcus, tell her this is insane." But he didn't. He just stood there, this man I'd loved, this man I'd built a life with, and said nothing. Dr. Patel, who'd delivered my son, stepped forward. She'd been quiet through all of this, professional, but now her face was tight with something I couldn't quite read. "Mr. DeLauro," she said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Marcus's voice was sharp. "I want answers now." "You ran the standard genetic screening, correct? For abnormalities?" "Yes, but—" "And? What did you find?" Dr. Patel glanced at me, then back at Marcus. I watched her weigh something in her mind, saw the exact moment she made a decision that would detonate everything. "Marcus," she said slowly, "the baby has a genetic marker that doesn't come from you." The room went silent. Vivienne's face lit up with a terrible, triumphant smile. Marcus stumbled back, like he'd been slapped. And me? I just sat there, holding my baby, feeling my entire world crack apart. I knew it. Vivienne's whisper cut through the silence like a knife. "I told you she was trash." "No." I shook my head, but my voice came out weak, useless. "No, that's not. There has to be a mistake. The science doesn't lie, dear." Vivienne was already pulling Marcus toward the door. "Come on, darling, our lawyer needs to hear about this immediately." "Marcus, please." He looked at me then. Really looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or betrayal or even pain. It was disgust. "Don't call me," he said. "Don't come to the apartment. We'll be in touch through our attorneys." And then they were gone. Just like that. I sat there in that sterile hospital room, holding my newborn son, still bleeding, still shaking from delivery, and tried to understand what had just happened. My vision started to blur, from tears I thought at first. But then the room began to spin, and I heard Dr. Patel's voice from very far away. "Anna? Anna, can you hear me?" The last thing I remembered before everything went black was my baby's cry. And Vivian's voice echoing in my head like a curse. "I told you she was trash." You know what's funny? When everything falls apart, your brain doesn't go to the big moments, it goes to the small ones. Lying there in that hospital bed, my son crying against my chest, I didn't think about our wedding day or the first time Marcus said he loved me. I thought about Tuesday mornings. Specifically, Tuesday mornings at 5:47 a.m., standing in our kitchen on the Upper West Side, packing Marcus's lunch while he slept. Turkey on whole wheat, light mayo, apple slices in a Ziploc bag because he liked them crisp, a note tucked inside that he never mentioned but I knew he read because sometimes I'd find them folded in his wallet. 7 years. That's how long I'd been making those lunches. 7 years of building someone else's empire, while mine never even got foundation poured. When I met Marcus, I was 24, working as a paralegal in Midtown and taking night classes at Hunter College. He was this ambitious guy with big dreams and bigger promises, gonna revolutionize real estate tech, gonna change the game. And God, he was magnetic. Made you feel like you were the only person in the room, like your belief in him mattered more than anything. So when he asked me to quit school for just one semester, just one so he could use my tuition money to invest in his first property flip, I said yes. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You believe in their dream until it becomes both of yours. That one semester turned into 7 years. I worked 2 jobs, paralegal by day, bartending at a dive in Hell's Kitchen 3 nights a week. Marcus worked too, but his work looked different. Networking lunches, golf outings, building relationships that somehow always required me to cover rent while he chased the next big deal. And when deals went south? I was there with my savings account, my credit cards, my $401k that I cashed out at 26 years old because he swore on his father's grave this flip in Astoria would make us whole. It didn't. But I never said I told you so, never threw it in my face, just picked up extra shifts and kept the lights on. Then there was Vivienne. His mother lost her savings, her words, not mine, in some investment scheme when I was 27. Suddenly she couldn't afford her Park Avenue maintenance fees, couldn't keep up with her lifestyle. And somehow, it became my job to fix it. Just for a few months, Marcus said, until she gets back on her feet. I sent her $2,000 a month for 18 months. Money I'd been saving for the baby we'd talked about having. Money that came from doubles at the bar, from skipping lunch, from buying my clothes at secondhand shops while Vivienne showed up to family dinners in Hermes scarves. She never said thank you. Not once. And Marcus's sister, Kara? Sweet girl, troubled soul. When she went to rehab the second time, guess who showed up every Sunday for family day? Not Vivienne. Not Marcus. Me. The girl from Queens who wasn't really family but was expected to act like it when it was convenient. I sat in those plastic chairs in that facility in Connecticut, holding Kara's hand while she cried about their father's expectations and their mother's coldness. I bought her books she wanted, snuck in her favorite candy, wrote her letters when visiting hours were over. When she got out, she stayed with us for 4 months. I meal prepped her recovery-friendly dinners, drove her to meetings, sat up with her during the hard nights when she wanted to use. Marcus barely came home during that period, said the stress was too much, said he needed space to focus on work. I remember one night Kara was 3 weeks sober, our kitchen sink started leaking. Not a little drip. A full-on spray that soaked the cabinet underneath and threatened to flood our downstairs neighbor. I called Marcus 7 times. He was at a business dinner and couldn't be interrupted. So I YouTubed it. Watched a 12-minute video about pipe fittings, went to the hardware store in Kara's borrowed jacket because I'd given mine away, and fixed the damn thing myself at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. When Marcus got home at 2 a.m., smelling like expensive whiskey and someone else's perfume, he didn't ask about the sink, just complained that I'd left tools on the counter. If you've ever given everything to someone who later turned away, you'll understand this part. You'll know that hollow feeling, that slow recognition that you've been building a house on sand, and the tide's been coming in for years. I thought loyalty would earn me love. I thought sacrifice would build something solid. I thought if I just held on long enough, kept giving enough, loved hard enough, we'd get to the other side. I didn't know I was feeding wolves. Thank you to everyone who helps keep these stories alive. Every word you share, every act of kindness helps protect those who still believe in family, who still think devotion means something. But here's what I learned, lying in that hospital bed with my newborn son and my absent husband. Wolves don't stop being wolves just because you feed them with your bare hands. They just learn to expect it. And when you finally have nothing left to give, that's when they show their teeth. The DNA results came back on a Thursday. I know because Thursday was trash day on our block, and I remember thinking how fitting that was, watching the sanitation truck crush everything into nothing while a nurse handed me an envelope that would do the same to my life. Miss Chen, not Mrs. DeLauro, they'd already started stripping me of his name. The paternity results are ready. Your husband requested we release them to his attorney first, but hospital policy requires we inform you as well. My hands shook as I opened it, medical jargon, percentages, genetic markers, and at the bottom, in cold, clinical text, probability of paternity, 0%. The paper slipped from my fingers. I was still recovering in a semi-private room. Marcus had refused to pay for a private suite, said there was no point now, and my roommate, an older Dominican woman who'd just had her 5th grandchild, reached across the space between our beds and squeezed my hand. Mija, she whispered. Whatever that paper says, I see you with that baby. I see the truth. But truth didn't matter, not when Marcus arrived 30 minutes later with an entourage. His lawyer, his mother, and cameras. Actual cameras. Someone filming on a phone. Someone else with what looked like a professional setup. What is this? I sat up too fast, felt the stitches pull, tasted copper in my mouth. Documentation, Vivian announced, sweeping into the room like she was gracing us with her presence. She was dressed for the occasion, Dior suit, fresh blowout, lipstick sharp enough to cut. We need everything on record. Marcus wouldn't look at me. Just stood behind his lawyer, this shark in a 3-piece suit who smiled like he'd already won. Miss Chen. The lawyer's voice was smooth, practiced. We have the paternity results. As you're aware, my client is not the biological father of the child you birthed. Therefore, we're here to formalize several immediate actions. Several? What are you talking about? He pulled out a tablet, started reading like he was ordering lunch. First, Mr. DeLauro will not be signing the birth certificate. Second, he's filing for an annulment of your marriage on grounds of fraud. Third, the child will be placed under temporary administrative hold until we determine next steps regarding custody and— Hold? The word came out strangled. You can't take my baby. We're not taking your baby. Vivienne's smile was poison. We're simply ensuring the hospital understands this child has no legal father, no financial support, and no claim to the DeLauro name or estate. She said it loud enough that the nurses at the station looked over, loud enough that my roommate gasped, loud enough that I felt every eye in that corridor turn toward us. Marcus finally spoke. You lied to me, Anna. For months. You let me think. I didn't lie. I was screaming now, didn't care who heard. I've never been with anyone else. Marcus, please, there has to be a mistake. The science doesn't make mistakes. Vivienne stepped closer, lowered her voice, just enough that the cameras wouldn't pick it up clearly. But we do appreciate you making this so easy. Something in her tone made my blood freeze. What? She glanced at the lawyer, at Marcus, and smiled. Did you really think we'd let you trap our family with a baby? Please. We've been planning this for months. The room tilted. Planning what? The apartment? Marcus finally met my eyes, and there was nothing there. No love, no guilt, just cold calculation. I transferred it to my name 6 weeks ago. You never noticed because you never checked. Why would you? You trusted me. 6 weeks ago, I was 7 months pregnant, wearing his ring, making his lunches. The lawyer was hired 8 weeks ago, Vivienne added, examining her nails. The annulment paperwork was drafted before you even went into labor. We just needed the DNA test as our final push. Our insurance policy. But— my voice broke. The test says he's not the father. How did you— Does it matter? Vivienne leaned in close, her perfume choking. You have nothing, darling. No home. No husband. No money. Oh, did Marcus mention he emptied your joint account this morning? All perfectly legal, of course. His earnings. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The numbers started adding up. Marcus's distance during my pregnancy, the way he'd insisted I quit my paralegal job at 6 months because stress wasn't good for the baby, how he'd slowly cut me off from my friends, my coworkers, anyone who might have helped me see what was happening. You planned this. I looked at Marcus. You did this on purpose. He shrugged. My mother's been saying for years you were beneath our family. Guess she was right. That's when his sister Kara appeared at the door. Sweet Kara, who I'd driven to AA meetings, who I'd held through withdrawals. She looked pale, sick, but she caught the eye of one of the nurses and whispered something that made the nurse's face go white. Later, that nurse told me what Kara said. This was the plan all along. They were going to destroy her no matter what. I tried to stand, felt my legs give out. The room exploded into motion, nurses rushing over, monitors beeping, Vivienne's victorious laugh cutting through everything. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was Marcus telling someone to make sure that baby stays in the nursery until we sort out the legal issues. He was taking my son. After everything. After 7 years of sacrifice and devotion and believing in him. He was taking the only thing I had left. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal made you question your own worth, you're not alone. Thank you to everyone who helps me tell these stories. Your support keeps this space alive for those who still believe that truth, somehow, will always find its way. When I came to, my roommate was still holding my hand. And I made a decision in that moment, lying in that hospital bed with empty arms and a shattered life. They wanted to destroy me? Fine. But I was going to make sure the whole world watched them try. The apartment they discharged me to wasn't mine anymore. I knew that before I even turned the key, knew it in the way the lock resisted, like the building itself was rejecting me. Marcus had changed it, of course he had. My clothes were in garbage bags on the sidewalk, already half soaked from the rain that had started that morning and hadn't stopped. Eli was 3 days old, wrapped in a hospital blanket because I hadn't been able to afford anything else. I stood there on West 73rd Street, holding my son, staring at trash bags full of my life, and felt nothing. That's what people don't tell you about rock bottom. It's not dramatic. It's just empty. A neighbor I'd known for 2 years walked past without making eye contact. I tried the bank next. Stood at the ATM with Eli strapped to my chest in a borrowed carrier, watching the screen flash "account restricted" over and over. Our joint account. The one with my paychecks from the last 7 years. The one Marcus had systematically drained and then frozen so I couldn't even access what was left. $47 in my wallet. That's what I had. My mother's voice played in my head, that conversation we'd had when I told her I was marrying Marcus. Those people aren't like us, Anna. They don't fight fair. I'd been so angry with her then, accused her of classism, of not believing I could belong in that world. Turns out she was right. I never belonged. I was just convenient. I found a studio in Washington Heights, $1,200 a month, which was criminal for 300 square feet with a window that looked into an air shaft and a radiator that clanked like it was trying to communicate with the dead. But the landlord didn't run a credit check. I didn't ask too many questions when I paid 2 months in cash, using money my roommate from the hospital that Dominican grandmother had quietly pressed into my hand before I left. For the baby, she'd said. Don't argue. The studio had a hot plate, a bathroom the size of a closet, and walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's TV like it was in the room with me. I sat on the bare mattress I'd bought from a street vendor, Eli sleeping in a dresser drawer lined with towels because I couldn't afford a crib yet, and tried to remember what hope felt like. Marcus's words played on loop in my head, "You let me think." But I hadn't. I hadn't done anything except love him, trust him, build a life with him. The rumors started within a week. I'd see people I knew from the neighborhood, other moms from the prenatal yoga class Vivienne had insisted I attend, women I'd had coffee with, people who'd congratulated me on my pregnancy and they'd turn away, cross the street. One woman literally pulled her daughter closer when I walked past, like betrayal was contagious. Vivienne had done her job well. The lies spread like oil on water. I'd trapped Marcus with a pregnancy that wasn't his. I'd been cheating for months. I was mentally unstable. I was dangerous. My phone stopped ringing. Messages went unanswered. Even my cousin in Brooklyn, who I'd been close with my whole life, sent one text, Mom says I shouldn't get involved, sorry. The silence was louder than any accusation. Then the voicemail came. Blocked number. A woman's voice, shaky and distorted like she was calling from inside a car or covering the phone. If you want the truth about your son's father, meet me alone. I'll contact you again. I deleted it, thought it was another one of Vivienne's games, another way to humiliate me, document my desperation. I wasn't falling for it. But then Eli got sick. It started small little tremors in his hands while he slept, breathing that sounded too fast, too shallow. I told myself it was normal, that newborns were fragile, that I was just paranoid because I was alone and terrified. Then he stopped eating. Just turned his head away from the bottle, his little face scrunched up in what looked like pain. I called the pediatrician's office. They told me their earliest appointment was in 3 weeks. I begged. The receptionist's voice went cold. We've been informed of some complications regarding payment and insurance. Until that's resolved. Marcus had removed us from his insurance. I sat on the floor of that studio at 2 a.m, warming a bottle on the hot plate because I didn't have a proper bottle warmer, watching my son's chest rise and fall too quickly, and felt something inside me crack. Not break, crack. Like ice on a lake that's still frozen but won't hold much longer. If you've ever sat in a room so quiet it started to echo your thoughts, you'll understand this silence. Thank you to those who help keep these stories alive. Your kindness helps give voice to people who've been forgotten, who sit alone in their pain, waiting to be seen again. I looked at Eli, at his perfect tiny face, his dark hair that Marcus had used as evidence against me, and realized something. I had been drowning for weeks, drowning in shame and isolation, and the weight of trying to prove my innocence to people who'd already decided I was guilty. But Eli couldn't swim yet. And if I went under, so would he. So I did the only thing left to do. I picked up my phone, scrolled to that blocked voicemail I deleted, and pulled it back from the trash. Hit play. And listened. Dr. Morales called me on a Tuesday, asked if I could come in alone. The way he said alone made my stomach drop. I brought Eli anyway, couldn't afford a sitter, couldn't trust anyone, and sat in that sterile office with my son against my chest while the doctor closed the door with the kind of care you use when you're about to break someone. Anna. He sat across from me, hands folded like he was praying. Eli's condition, the tremors, the breathing issues, we got the full genetic panel back. My heart stopped. Is he okay? He has a mitochondrial disorder. Rare, but treatable, if we can find a genetic match for stem cell therapy. Ideally a close male relative. He paused. I reached out to Marcus's office to request testing. And he refused. But Anna, even if he'd agreed. Dr. Morales leaned forward. Marcus isn't a match. The markers don't align. You mean because he's not the father? No. His voice dropped. I mean because whoever Eli's biological father is, he's genetically close to Marcus, but not him. A brother, an uncle, or... He stopped, looked at me with something like pity. Anna, are you aware Marcus's father has a sealed criminal record? The room tilted. What? Richard DeLauro. Multiple sealed cases from the 90s. I shouldn't even know this, but when I was running Eli's genetics, certain flags came up in our database. Hospitals share information for cases like this. Richard's DNA is on file from an old investigation. Sexual assault. The victim never pressed charges. Money changed hands. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Richard DeLauro, Marcus's father, the man who died 3 years ago, the man whose funeral I'd helped plan, whose eulogy Marcus had cried through. When did you say Eli was conceived? Based on the genetics? Dr. Morales pulled up a chart. Early April, between the 3rd and the 10th approximately. April, Marcus had been in Singapore closing a deal, gone for 2 weeks. I remembered because I'd felt so alone, so scared about starting fertility treatments when he got back. But someone else had been there. The memory hit me like a fist. Richard stopping by the apartment, bringing dinner because Marcus asked me to check on you, the wine he'd poured, how sick I'd felt the next morning. The gaps in that night hours I couldn't account for, blamed on exhaustion and the Ambien I'd been taking for insomnia. Oh God. Oh God. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. I need to go. Anna. But I was already moving. Eli clutched against me, my whole body shaking with something between rage and horror. I went straight to Kara's apartment in the East Village. Marcus's sister. The one I'd saved. The one who'd whispered that warning in the hospital. She opened the door looking haunted. "You knew," I said. No greeting, no preamble. "You knew what your father did." Kara's face crumpled. "Anna, tell me." She let me in, closed the door, and started crying before she even spoke. "There were others. Before you. Dad had a pattern. Mom always made them go away. Money, NDAs, threats, whatever it took." Kara. That night in April, when Marcus was traveling, Dad told Mom he was handling the Anna situation. She thought he meant convincing you to sign a prenup, but I saw the footage from the hallway camera. He had a key. He went into your apartment at 9 p.m. and didn't leave until 3 a.m. The floor dropped out from under me. "Marcus knows?" "Mom told him right after you announced you were pregnant. Said the timeline was suspicious." Marcus checked his travel records and realized. Her voice broke. "They did the math, Anna. They knew before you did. The whole DNA test, the public humiliation, it was theater. They wanted you destroyed so you'd never look deeper. If you've ever found truth in the quiet moments after pain, you know what this part feels like. Thank you to everyone who supports these stories. Your kindness keeps hope alive for people still finding their voice after betrayal." I stood in Kara's apartment, holding my son, the child conceived not through love but through violence, covered up by money and malice, and felt something cold settle into my bones. Not despair. Clarity. I didn't conceive a child with my husband. I was violated by a dead man. And his family had been destroying me to hide it. There comes a point when silence stops meaning defeat. It becomes preparation. I sat in that Washington Heights studio at dawn, Eli sleeping in his drawer crib, light filtering through the airshaft window like it was searching for something to illuminate. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop, the old one I'd bought myself before Marcus, before I'd learned to ask permission for everything. The coffee next to me had gone cold an hour ago. I hadn't noticed. I was too busy building a case. First, the hospital security footage. I called the patient advocate's office, cited HIPAA regulations, requested all recordings from the maternity ward during my stay. The woman on the phone hesitated, probably wondered why I wanted footage of my own humiliation, but hospital policy was hospital policy. "It'll take 3 to 5 business days," she said. "That's fine. I have time." And I did. Because for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't running Marcus's errands or managing his mother's crises or holding someone else's life together with duct tape and hope. I was building something of my own. Second, the text messages. I'd never deleted anything, a habit from my paralegal days. Every message Vivienne had sent me over the years, saved in the cloud, the ones where she'd asked for money. The ones where she'd insulted me, then asked for more money. The thread from 2 months before Eli was born where she'd written, "Marcus says you're getting too comfortable. Remember where you came from." Screenshot. Save. Document. Third, Marcus's financial records. I still had login access to our joint account. He'd frozen it but hadn't changed the password, because men like Marcus don't think women pay attention to details. I downloaded 3 years of statements, traced every transaction, found the payment to a private fertility clinic in March. $15,000. The month before Richard had checked on me. Found the payment to a law firm in June, 2 months into my pregnancy. $8,500 retainer for family legal services. Found the wire transfer to Vivienne the day after Eli was born. $50,000. Memo line. Expenses handled. Screenshot. Save. Document. For years, I mistook generosity for love. Now, I'm learning the quiet math of self-respect. Kara came by on the 3rd day. Brought diapers she'd paid for herself, formula she'd stolen from Vivienne's pantry where it had been stockpiled in case Anna ever comes crawling back. "I want to help," she said, sitting on my floor, "because I only had 1 chair. I need to help. What they did, what Dad did. I need you to write it down," I told her. "Everything you know, everything you heard, dates if you remember them, conversations, who knew what and when." She looked at me with something like fear. "Marcus will destroy me. Marcus is going to destroy himself." I handed her a legal pad and pen. "You're just going to tell the truth." She wrote for 2 hours, pages and pages, how Richard had bragged to Vivienne about handling his indiscretions, how there'd been others, at least 4 women over 20 years, all paid off, all silenced. How Vivienne had found the hallway camera footage and instead of confronting Richard, had saved it as insurance. How Marcus had known before I even announced my pregnancy, had run the numbers, had realized his father had violated his wife and decided to destroy me instead of facing it. He couldn't handle people knowing Dad was a rapist, Kara whispered. Easier to call you a cheater. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just took the legal pad and added it to my file. Document. Save. Build. Fourth, I found a lawyer, not the expensive kind, I couldn't afford that. But a woman in the Bronx who'd built her practice on cases like mine. Cases where wealthy families tried to bury poor women under paperwork and shame. Her name was Ramona Ortiz. She looked at my folder now 3 inches thick and smiled like a shark. This, she said, tapping the medical records showing Eli's conception date versus Marcus's travel schedule, is a prosecutor's dream. But first, we go civil. Make them bleed money before we make them bleed truth. I want them exposed, I told her. Not just punished, exposed. Then we're going to get along just fine. My phone started ringing around day 6, Marcus first, then Vivienne, then Marcus's lawyer. 12 calls, 17 texts, 3 emails. All asking why I'd requested hospital security footage. All asking why their bank had flagged suspicious activity on Marcus's accounts. All demanding I respond immediately. I sat at my little table, feeding Eli a bottle, watching my phone light up over and over, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from money or status or a last name that opens doors. The kind that comes from knowing the truth and having proof and being willing to wait for the exact right moment to speak. It's funny how silence can sound like thunder when guilt starts to echo. They taught me that love meant giving. Today, I'm teaching myself that love can also mean stopping. On day 8, I received an envelope, hand-delivered to my building, no return address. Inside, a hospital document I'd never seen before. Richard DeLaro's sealed medical records from 1998, a paternity test, a settlement agreement for $200,000 paid to a 19-year-old girl who'd worked in his office. And a note, typed, "There are 3 more, I can help you find them." No signature. I looked at Eli, at his perfect face, at the life I was building for him, from scraps and rage and stubborn, quiet determination. Then I picked up my phone and texted Ramona. "We need to meet. I found more." Her response came immediately. "Tuesday, 9 a.m. Bring everything." For the first time, I didn't need them to hear me. My silence had already spoken. And the storm I was building? It had a name, a date, and a courtroom. The press conference was held in a community center in the Bronx, not some polished Manhattan law office. Ramona said it was strategic. Let them come to our turf for once. I arrived at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, Eli strapped to my chest in the carrier Kara had bought us. He was awake, quiet, watching the world with those dark eyes that had been used as evidence against me. I wore the same dress I'd worn to my wedding, not because I was sentimental, but because it was the only decent thing I owned that still fit. The room was packed, reporters, cameras, a few curious neighbors who'd seen the notice posted outside. And in the back, standing like they owned the building, Marcus, Vivienne, and their lawyer, a man whose retainer probably cost more than my studio's annual rent. Vivienne saw me first. Her face twisted into something between disgust and panic. Marcus wouldn't look at me at all, just stared at his phone like if he ignored me hard enough, I'd disappear. I'd been disappearing for them for years. Not today. The district attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation, but I liked her, immediately stood at the podium. "Thank you all for coming. We're here today regarding a matter of public interest involving the DeLaro family and serious allegations of sexual assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice." You could hear the cameras click like locusts. Miss Anna Chen has brought forward substantial evidence that we believe warrants immediate criminal investigation. Miss Chen, would you like to make a statement? I stepped forward. Eli shifted against my chest but didn't cry. Ramona stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, not holding me up, just letting me know I wasn't alone. I looked directly at Marcus, then at Vivienne, then at the cameras. "My name is Anna Chen. 7 months ago, I gave birth to my son Eli. 2 hours after delivery, my husband Marcus DeLaro refused to sign the birth certificate. He accused me of infidelity. His mother demanded a DNA test. When it showed Marcus wasn't the biological father, they publicly humiliated me, froze my bank accounts, and worked to have my son taken from me. My voice didn't shake. Not once. What they didn't tell anyone what they knew and chose to hide was that the biological father wasn't a stranger. It was Marcus's father, Richard DeLauro. The room erupted, flashes, shouts, the sound of Vivienne's voice cutting through. "That's a lie! This is slander!" I didn't stop. In April of last year, Richard DeLauro came to my apartment while Marcus was traveling. He brought dinner. He poured wine. I don't remember most of that night, but I remember being sick for days after. I thought it was stress. I thought I was losing my mind. I held up a folder. Ramona took it and handed copies to the DA, to the reporters in the front row. "This is a medical report confirming the date of conception. April 7th. Marcus was in Singapore from April 1st to April 15th. Richard DeLauro's credit card statement shows he was in New York. His building security footage, which I've obtained, shows him entering and leaving my apartment building that night." Marcus stood up. "This is insane. Dad is dead, he can't defend himself." "Your father is dead," I said, looking at him for the first time since the hospital, "but his DNA isn't. Eli has a mitochondrial condition that required genetic testing. The hospital ran a match against existing records. Your father's DNA was on file from a 1998 investigation. The match is conclusive." I watched the color drain from his face. "But here's what I really want everyone to know." My voice dropped, cold and clear as winter. Marcus knew. Before I even announced I was pregnant, Vivienne told him the timeline didn't match. They did the math. They knew what Richard had done. And instead of protecting me, instead of getting justice for what his father did to his wife, Marcus chose to destroy me. I held up another document. "This is a retainer agreement. Marcus hired a divorce attorney 8 weeks before Eli was born. This is the deed transfer. He moved our apartment into his name alone while I was 7 months pregnant. This is a text message from Vivienne to Marcus. Once the DNA test confirms it, we can bury her without anyone asking questions." The silence in that room was absolute. "They didn't just fail to protect me from a rapist," I said. "They weaponized what he did, turned my assault into my shame, made me the villain in my own violation." Vivienne was crying now, real tears, but not for me. For herself. For the empire crumbling around her. "We have testimony," Patricia Chen added, "from 2 other women who received settlements from Richard DeLauro under similar circumstances, women who were too afraid to come forward until now. The DeLauro family used their wealth and influence to silence victims for decades." Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, tell them this is a lie." But Vivienne just sat there, mascara running, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. "There's also the matter," Patricia continued, "of fraudulent financial transfers and conspiracy to commit identity fraud. We'll be filing charges against both Marcus and Vivienne DeLauro today." I watched them. Watched Marcus realize his lawyer was already backing toward the door. Watched Vivienne's pearls catch the fluorescent light one last time before an officer approached her with handcuffs. "Mrs. Vivienne DeLauro, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud." Marcus tried to run, made it maybe 10 feet before 2 officers stopped him at the exit. "Mr. Marcus DeLauro, I didn't do anything. She's lying. She's always been trash. She trapped our family." "Sir, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." I stood there, holding my son, and watched my husband, the man I'd given 7 years, to get handcuffed in front of cameras that would broadcast this to every corner of the city. I didn't smile. Didn't laugh. Just held Eli closer and whispered, "It's over, baby. It's finally over." Someone asked if I had anything else to say. I looked at the cameras one last time. To anyone who's been made to feel small by people who thought their money made them untouchable, keep the receipts. Tell the truth. And never, ever apologize for surviving. Then I walked out into the November sun, my son against my heart, and breathed free air for the first time in years. After the verdict, silence became my favorite sound. It was the sound of justice finally breathing. I didn't attend Marcus's arraignment. Didn't need to. Ramona sent me updates via text, short, matter of fact, like weather reports. Bail set at $500K. Vivienne used family assets. Marcus couldn't make his portion. He'll stay in Rikers pending trial. I read it while feeding Eli his bottle in our tiny studio, sunlight filtering through the airshaft window, and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, just the quiet hum of a world finally making sense. The consequences unfolded like dominoes one after another, inevitable as gravity. Marcus lost his real estate license within a week. The state board didn't even need the criminal conviction, the press coverage alone was enough. Turns out people don't want investment advice from a man who helped cover up his father's crimes. His clients vanished overnight. The deals he'd been so proud of? Dissolved. The empire he'd built on my tuition money and sacrifice? Gone. I heard through Kara that he'd moved into Vivian's Park Avenue apartment, the one I'd helped her keep with my bartending money, but Vivian was barely there. She'd been released on bail but was under house arrest, ankle monitor blinking like a tiny beacon of karma beneath her Chanel suits. The socialites who'd once fawned over her blocked her number. The charity boards she'd chaired quietly removed her name from their websites. Even her hairdresser refused to see her, said the appointment slot was permanently unavailable. Kara told me Vivian spent her days alone in that massive apartment, surrounded by furniture worth more than most people's homes, eating takeout because she'd never learned to cook. Because women like Vivian never had to. They just took from women like me and called it grace. She keeps calling me, Kara said one afternoon, visiting with more diapers, more formula, more quiet acts of penance, asking if I think you'd be willing to drop the charges. If maybe we could all just move on. I looked at her. What did you tell her? I told her some bridges don't get rebuilt, they get burned for a reason. Kara had changed, got a job at a nonprofit, started going to therapy, stopped answering her mother's calls. She visited Eli and me twice a week, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because she was trying to be the kind of person who showed up. I don't forgive you, I told her once, honest and direct. But I respect that you're trying. She nodded, tears in her eyes. That's more than I deserve. The Delero company, the real estate empire Richard had built, that Marcus had tried to inherit, collapsed within 3 months. Investors pulled out. Partners distanced themselves. The investigation uncovered years of financial manipulation, bribed inspectors, code violations covered up with cash. The company filed for bankruptcy on a Tuesday. I read about it in the Times while sitting in a coffee shop in Washington Heights, Eli sleeping against my chest, and felt the ghost of the girl I'd been the one who'd believed in Marcus's dreams finally let go. I didn't need to ruin them. Their lies had already done that. Marcus tried to see me once. Showed up outside my building on a cold December morning, looking hollow and desperate in a coat that used to cost 3 months of my rent. Anna, please. I just need 5 minutes. I walked past him carrying Eli, my grocery bags, my dignity. Anna! I stopped, turned, looked at him with the eyes of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt into something harder, clearer, more true. You don't get closure, Marcus. You get consequences. His face crumpled. I'm sorry. I was scared. I was confused. Mom was in my head. You knew what your father did to me and you chose to call me a whore. My voice was quiet, steady as stone. You don't come back from that. Not with apologies. Not ever. I walked into my building and didn't look back. Some people don't deserve closure. They deserve exactly what they get. The echo of their own choices in an empty room. The hospital called me in January. Said they needed to finalize Eli's birth certificate. It had been under administrative review during the investigation. What would you like listed for the father? The clerk asked. I thought about it. Thought about Richard's name, about Marcus's name, about the violence and lies and years of manipulation. None listed, I said, per mother's request. Are you sure? It's permanent. I'm sure. Eli didn't need a father's name on a piece of paper. He had me. He had the truth. He had a life free from people who mistook cruelty for strength. That was enough. They used to whisper that I'd lost my mind. Now they avoid their own reflections. I saw Vivian once more months later, outside the courthouse during her sentencing hearing. She looked smaller somehow, older, her pearl necklace gone, her hair showing gray at the roots. Our eyes met for just a moment. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just held Eli a little closer and kept walking. Some debts don't need to be collected. Life has its own way of balancing the books. That night, I stood at my window, the same airshaft window in the same tiny studio, and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably lying awake, wondering how it all fell apart. Vivian was probably sitting in that empty apartment, surrounded by things that used to mean something. And me? I was home. With my son, with my truth, with the quiet, hard-won peace of someone who'd been to hell and walked back out carrying her dignity like a torch. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their punishment. I just needed them gone from my story. And finally, beautifully, they were. After the noise fades, what's left isn't victory, it's understanding. I started writing 6 months after the trial ended. Not a book, not a memoir, just pages. Scattered thoughts in a notebook I kept beside Eli's crib, words I wrote while he slept and the city hummed outside our window. I wasn't trying to be profound. I was just trying to make sense of how a life could shatter and rebuild itself in the span of a year. But words have a way of finding people who need them. A legal aid attorney I'd met through Ramona asked if she could share parts of my story anonymized, carefully with clients facing similar situations. Women who'd been trapped, silenced, made to feel crazy for questioning their own reality. Your story gives them language, she said, shows them there's a path out. So I said yes. And then the messages started coming. Women who'd worked for Richard DeLauro decades ago. Women who'd been paid off, threatened, told their truth didn't matter because his lawyers were better, his checkbook deeper, his name more respected than theirs would ever be. One woman, Margaret, 58, living in New Jersey, wrote, "I was 19, he was 42. It took me 40 years to say his name out loud. Thank you for making me brave enough." Another, "I thought I was the only one. I thought I was crazy. You saved my life by telling yours." We met, eventually. 7 of us in a community center in Queens on a Tuesday night, no cameras, no lawyers. Just women who'd survived the same man, the same family, the same machine, designed to crush anyone who threatened their perfect image. We didn't call it a support group, we called it Coffee and Truth. And for the first time in my life, I understood that justice isn't about watching them fall. It's about standing again without hate. I still think about Marcus sometimes. Wonder if he understands what he lost, not me but himself, the person he could have been if he'd chosen courage over comfort. If he'd looked at what his father did and said no more instead of, "How do we hide this?" But that was his choice to make. And I can't carry his regret for him. I used to believe love meant giving everything. Now I know love also means knowing when to stop. One afternoon in early spring, I took Eli to Central Park. He was almost a year old, babbling at pigeons, grabbing at grass, living in that pure present tense way children do before the world teaches them to worry. We sat on a bench near Sheep Meadow, sun warm on our faces, and I thought about everything that had brought us here: the hospital room, the betrayal, the studio apartment, the evidence folders, the courtroom, the silence after. A woman sat down next to us, older, maybe 70, with kind eyes and a paperback novel in her lap. "Beautiful boy," she said, smiling at Eli. "Thank you. You look tired." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there." She closed her book. "My husband left me with 3 kids and no money 40 years ago. Told everyone I was unstable. I spent a decade proving I wasn't. Did it work?" "Eventually." She looked at Eli, at me. But the real freedom came when I stopped needing it to work, when I realized I didn't need his version of the story to dissolve for mine to be true. I felt tears prick my eyes. How long did that take? Longer than it should have. She patted my hand. "But you look like you're already there." Maybe I was. The criminal trial took 8 months. Vivienne was convicted of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Sentenced to 18 months, would probably serve 9 with good behavior. Marcus took a plea deal, 2 years probation, community service, permanent mark on his record. Neither of them looked at me during sentencing. I didn't need them to. Because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped measuring my worth by their acknowledgement. Ramona called me after it was over. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Stood at my window with Eli on my hip, watching the city turn gold in the evening light. "Free," I said. "Not happy. Not healed. Just free." "That's enough," she said. "That's everything." I wrote one final entry in my notebook that night. To the woman reading this in the dark, wondering if it's worth it to tell the truth. It is. Not because justice is guaranteed, it's not. Not because people will believe you immediately, they won't. But because your silence protects people who don't deserve protection. And your voice, even if it shakes, even if it breaks, might be the permission someone else needs to use theirs. Evil hides behind family portraits and last names carved in marble. It hides behind charitable donations and country club memberships and the word respectable. But when the truth walks into the light, even small truth, even quiet truth, power melts. My revenge wasn't anger. It was clarity. And clarity is the most dangerous weapon a woman can carry. I closed the notebook, kissed Eli's forehead, made myself tea in my tiny kitchen that I paid for with my own money, in my own name, without apology or explanation. If you've ever lost yourself trying to love someone who only saw your worth in numbers, I hope my story reminds you, it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for keeping these stories alive, stories where justice doesn't shout, it heals. Outside, the city kept moving, ambulances and laughter and 1,000 stories unfolding in real time. Mine was just one, small and specific and human. But it was mine. And nobody, not Marcus, not Vivienne, not Richard's ghost, not the weight of their money or their name or their version of events could take that from me. Justice gave me back my name. But peace? Peace gave me back myself. And that, I thought, watching my son sleep in the glow of the city lights, was the only ending that mattered.